guilty, if that's the right word, of very much the same thing. He's quoted their website and the description of the Fedora distro, and it reads very, very similar to the Ubuntu, or the Ubuntu one reads very similar to Fedora, whichever way you want to look at it. And neither mention the word Linux. Just very quickly, since we're talking about Chrome operating system, is there anything you would like to add, Roy or Gordon, about staying away from the word Linux? Is it a bad thing? Do you think people are put off that maybe don't know the Linux operating system?
There's this thing being said about words being hijacked in general in politics, and trying to dissociate and to perturb the connotations that go along with words like libertarian and the words like anarchist, and people, when they think of these words, they have the media kind of project a certain image to their faces sometimes. So when you say something like terrorist, lots of people will think about people who are Muslim for some reason. And it doesn't have to, of course, you can have domestic terrorism, you can have terrorism without the physical violence sometimes. And then when you have things like people who are associated with anarchism, you don't really think of intellectuals who advocate this thing. You usually think of people smashing cars, and that's very intentional. That's supposed to change the way you think of things. And the same thing happens with Linux, in the sense that when you think of Linux, you think of a hacker sitting on a command line and doing something very complicated. So people say, "Oh, he's using Linux. Oh, it must be very advanced and very professional about computers." And this is the type of thing that makes people think, well, I don't really want to try Linux because I use Windows and I'm not very good with computers, so I should be using Linux. You should be using Windows, and Linux is really difficult. Now, as we probably know from distros with advanced desktop environment, GNOME 2.3 and KDE4, it's just as easy to use, especially if you've never used computers before. So these companies try to form to start with a clean sheet, so to speak, and so does Google. Google is trying to use it actually has the brand which is Chrome, and Chrome OS, Chromium, and so on, and they try to build the operating system based on the reputation of the browser. So if they say, well, we've got 130, I think they say 130 million users of Chrome, then that kind of give legitimacy to the operating systems. They can say, well, everyone using the browser by now, and they're very happy with that. And also, when they succeed and when they want to market the thing, they can exclude the competition, and that's where it becomes a bit more of an issue. When you try to push people away and say, well, that's not the Ubuntu operating system, that's just something else. And if you want to call your distribution, which is based on Ubuntu, something like Ubuntu, or there were all kinds of satanic editions, they try to kind of push these people out of the market and say, that's, you have no right to use this name. And that's kind of problematic, I think.
But then again, sorry, Gordon.
No, I was just going to say, right, while we're on this guy's post, might be worth mentioning, this guy is known by the name Reality on Identica, and he rivals Roy and Fab from Linux Outlaws, and the amount of posts. He is a demon on Identica. He just posts all the time. He sounds like a really nice bloke as well. And him and P Squid, Psychedelic Squid, I think that stands for, they're both the people behind Identicurs, which is a command line Identica client that's worth checking out. So I just thought I'd mention that, since this is the same guy's blog post.
Yeah, it's it's so many things. So many things about his post. So I've said, yeah, I agree with that, because I very rarely find people who agree or follow my viewpoint, or I follow theirs, about the branding issue. Whilst myself, and everybody who uses Linux knows that Ubuntu and the Linux operating system is great. The fact is the mainstream don't, and I think if there's any chance of people moving away from Windows, we have to face facts that we do need branding, because the mainstream non-tech interested who just want a computer to work and just do the jobs that they have, like Facebook or email or whatever, I think branding is the only way that we can shift people and show people that there is an alternative and a better alternative.
There is another element to this, and that's that if you say to someone who's never heard of Linux before, Say if all they've seen is Windows or OS 10, and you say, have you heard of Linux? No, what's that? Right, go to linux.com. Show me a picture of Linux. Show me the desktop of Linux. What's it like? And then you have to go into and say, well, there's actually different desktops. There's KDE and there's XFCE and there's GNOME and there's Window Maker, and it's like, well, what's all this? What's all this? What's this Linux? You've told me about Linux. What is this Linux? I want to see Linux. And there is no one single one. You've got lots and lots of distributions, lots of choice and all sorts of things. So I think when you sort of split that out, then Ubuntu, or I mean, as Luke pointed out, Fedora in their example, or whether it's Android or something, they can actually brand it and say, this is what you expect. If you use Ubuntu, this is what you expect. If you use Fedora, this is what you expect. If you use Android, this is what you expect. So it does sort of give a focus point to that, but with the branding.
And I think a lot of users, if they say move to Ubuntu or Fedora, and they're brand new Linux users, it would only be a matter of time, in a very short period of time, before they'd then cotton on to the fact that there were other distributions available. And once, obviously, they found their feet with Fedora or Ubuntu, whatever distro they first go to, that then branches them out into other options and other avenues. And like I said, I do think it's very important to have a brand, because it's the way the mainstream user works.
It doesn't have to be Linux, though. You know, it could be the GNU brand, or it could be the name of the desktop. So one thing you could ask is what do we want to advertise? I mean, Linux is a component in lots of operating systems now. I mean, even WebOS and Mimo and Migo and most of the mobile ones were using it. I mean, some of them don't exist anymore, but Linux is you wouldn't call it an operating system. It's more of a platform or a kernel. Platform is kind of a stretch, but when you make the operating system, it's kind of reasonable to give it a name. And it would be nice if people knew what's underneath, but you don't really expect them to do that. But then the question is not really the attribution, you know, do you call it GNU or do you call it Linux? You could say to, I don't know, Chrome, I suppose it's based on all kinds of components which could receive some credit, but the main thing is to try and stick to the principles of freedom, or to try and inherit the the value proposition that you originally had with the underlying components. So you still know that Linux, even though it contains proprietary things like drivers and you know, that's the whole question. I don't want to try and call it proprietary, but you have companies from the outside pushing all kinds of things into it, all kinds of hooks and stuff which are not free. And then
yeah, I think that comes down.
So I think we lost Gordon there for a second. Sorry, Gordon. Do you want to start again? I think you broke a bit there.
Right, you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. No, I think that comes down to more the attitude when people are coming into this new world of free software or free Linux, open source, whatever. The way I do it is when I'm introducing new people onto Linux.
And I think we lost Gordon.
Yeah.
What we'll do, we'll come back to Gordon's point in a second, and I'll just add mine while hopefully Gordon gets the connection back up again. And we're blaming Gordon here. That might be a bit unfair. It could well be myself or Roy.
We had some noise as well on the track. That's very unusual. I'm supposed to make it fine next time. But
I mean, what I was just gonna add to Gordon's point, and hopefully you come back on before I finish. It's I do truly believe that we need a focal point, a flagship, if you like, of Linux, something that new users can flock to and maybe stick with, or have the option to go elsewhere after they've experienced Linux and sort of found their feet. And that's why I like to champion things like Fedora or Ubuntu, and because it gives people a focal point. If I just say, have you tried Linux? It's a very general thing. If you type in Linux on Google and look for some screenshots, there's 1,001 distros that'll be shown to you on the screenshots page. And I think a focal point is good because at the end of the day, people are up against in terms of choice a monopoly on the desktop, which tells you that there is no choice.
You view as the accomplishment. So some people view Linux as more of a choice thing, of trying to offer people different options. So if they don't want Windows, they can have something else. Or some people, it's the issue of price. And I've actually met people who just started to use Linux because they didn't have enough